Picture this. The blazing sun hangs heavy over the sprawling plains of ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. The air is thick with dust and heat, and in the midst of a bustling village near the banks of the Tigris or Euphrates, a clay pot sits forgotten in the corner of a simple mud brick home. It's filled with a soggy mixture of water and crushed grains, perhaps leftovers from a bread-making attempt or a storage mistake. Days pass. The heat does its quiet work. Wild yeasts, drifting invisibly through the air, land inside the mixture, triggering a process no one fully understands yet: fermentation. And then, curiosity, hunger, or perhaps sheer accident leads someone to taste the odd, bubbling liquid. It's unlike anything they've ever consumed. It's cloudy, earthy, and surprisingly fizzy. There is that strange warmth that spreads after the sip, a lightness, a giddy joy. That, right there, in that unintentional sip, is humanity's first taste of beer. Not crafted with intention, not the result of years of planning, but a complete accident, born out of time, temperature, nature, and chance. But here's the wild part. That strange drink wouldn't just stay a local curiosity. Over time, this fermented concoction would become something greater. It would become sacred. It would be a tool of unity and ritual, a payment for laborers, a celebratory drink for festivals, a gift to the gods. Beer would fuel the workers who built ziggurats and pyramids. It would be used in ceremonies, honored in hymns, and praised in poetry. It would be brewed in monasteries, sold in taverns, taxed by kings, and studied by scientists. From ancient clay jars to modern brewpubs, beer has been on an epic journey, a journey that traces the very rise of human civilization itself. And so, our story begins, with one forgotten pot, one accidental fermentation, and a drink that would change the course of history forever. Welcome, fellow time travelers, to another immersive plunge into the rich and savory depths of food history, a world where the meals we eat and the drinks we sip tell the grandest stories of our past. Today, we're not just popping the cap off a bottle for a casual drink. No, today, we're cracking open an ancient mystery, one brewed in clay jars, whispered in Sumerian hymns, and foamed across the ages. We are not here for mere refreshment, we're here for revelation. Our journey takes us back thousands of years, to the heart of the Fertile Crescent, a lush, crescent-shaped region stretching from the Persian Gulf through modern-day Iraq, Syria, and into Egypt, a place often called the cradle of civilization. In ancient Sumer, nestled between the life-giving rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, early humans discovered that fermented grain could produce a drink that did more than satisfy thirst. It brought people together, nourished them in ways water could not, and stirred something deeper: ritual, creativity, and community. But beer wasn't just a beverage. In Sumer and beyond, beer was currency, used to pay workers and soldiers. It was sacred, offered to gods and goddesses as divine tribute. It was survival, a safe, nutritious alternative to often contaminated water. And perhaps, most provocatively of all, it may have been the very reason we stopped roaming as hunters and gatherers. That's not just wild speculation, it's a serious theory held by some archaeologists and anthropologists. They argue that humanity's great leap into agriculture wasn't driven solely by a desire for bread or grain porridge, but by a thirst for beer. That the domestication of barley and the establishment of permanent settlements were motivated, at least in part, by the desire to produce this bubbly, nourishing brew consistently. After all, you can't ferment in a tent on the move. You need a place to stay, a place to store grain, a place to brew, a place to gather. In other words, you need civilization. So, while we often credit the plow and the loaf for transforming humanity, maybe, just maybe, it was the pint that did it first. But before we dive in, let's take a moment to acknowledge the effort that goes into bringing these incredible stories to life. Every time we explore the past, whether it's about the ancient origins of beer or the fascinating food traditions from long ago, it takes a lot of research, dedication, and passion. Behind every episode, there's a curious mind piecing together historical facts, uncovering long-lost recipes, and connecting the dots between cultures. So, if you appreciate the time and effort it takes to dig deep into food history, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Your support helps us keep bringing these stories to you, and trust me, there's so much more to discover. Now, let's get into the frothy, fascinating world of beer, and see how this accidental invention built entire civilizations. So here's a question for you. Do you think beer was more important than bread in human history? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to know where you stand in the beer versus bread debate. And hey, if you're enjoying this blend of archaeology, anthropology, and ale, hit that like button and subscribe for more tasty tales from food's forgotten past. Let's rewind the clock, way back, to a time before recipes, before farming manuals, before even the idea of a kitchen. We're in the era of early human experimentation, when trial and error in the natural world could accidentally spark cultural revolutions. This is where the story of beer truly begins, not in a brewer's workshop, but in nature's own laboratory. It all likely started with a happy microbial accident, wild fermentation. Early humans storing a mash of water-soaked grains, maybe leftovers from making flatbreads, or gruel, in primitive clay pots. Left in a warm environment, these mixtures would naturally attract wild yeasts from the air. And without even knowing it, they were creating the chemical magic of fermentation. Before the word even existed, beer was quietly being born, its bubbles rising in the shadows of the first human settlements. What we now know from archaeology backs this up. Ancient shards of pottery found in Mesopotamia, some over 6,000 years old, bear microscopic traces of fermented grain residues. They tell a story of intention and repetition. Even more compelling, the written records of the Sumerians, among the world's first to develop a written language, include hymns and pictographs dedicated to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. One of the earliest surviving poems from Sumer is essentially a beer recipe, a lyrical tribute to brewing. Humanity's first cookbook may well have been a love song to ale. So, while the origin of beer may have been a glorious accident, its importance was quickly recognized. It wasn't long before early societies were perfecting the process, recording it, and ritualizing it. What began as an unintentional bubbling in a clay pot would become a cornerstone of daily life, spiritual practice, and even political structure. Beer wasn't just invented, it evolved with us. As civilization took root and blossomed along riverbanks and floodplains, beer didn't just follow, it helped lay the foundation. In ancient cities like Uruk and Thebes, beer wasn't merely a drink, it was a way of life, embedded in the fabric of society, economy, and religion. Let's take a closer look at how beer flowed through the veins of the world's earliest great civilizations. In ancient Sumer, beer was more than a popular beverage, it was a basic human right. Daily rations of beer were standard across all social classes, from royalty to common laborers. In fact, Sumerian laborers who helped construct temples and ziggurats were paid in beer and bread. A practice so widespread that it shows up in the earliest written payroll records, etched in cuneiform on clay tablets. Beer was sustenance, hydration, and compensation all in one. The Sumerians even had over 20 different words for beer, each referring to its style, strength, or purpose. Head west to ancient Egypt, and beer takes on a divine glow. Egyptians believed beer was a gift from the gods, specifically the goddess Atha, often associated with joy, music, and drunkenness. Beer wasn't just for the living, it accompanied the dead on their journey to the afterlife. Tombs have been unearthed with miniature breweries and jars of beer, packed lovingly beside the deceased. And let's not forget the builders of the pyramids. Those massive structures weren't just feats of engineering. They were powered by daily beer rations, given to laborers to keep them strong, nourished, and perhaps a little more cheerful under the desert sun. Meanwhile, across the continent in ancient China, beer had deep roots. As early as 7000 BCE, Evidence from the Jiahu site reveals a fermented drink made from rice, honey, and fruit, an ancient cousin of beer. While Chinese brewing evolved along different lines, the principle was the same. Fermentation became a vehicle for nutrition, medicine, and sacred rituals. They carried spiritual significance and communal meaning. From Asia to Africa to the Middle East, beer was ritual, reward, and resource. It was poured as an offering to the gods, sipped in celebration, and relied upon in day-to-day life. In every corner of the ancient world, where civilizations began to rise, beer was there, bubbling quietly in the background, fueling the dawn of human society. Now let's talk about what happened when beer left the realm of the sacred and communal, and entered the heart of the home. In the ancient world, brewing wasn't an industry, it was a domestic craft, and it was one largely led by women. Picture a bustling household in Mesopotamia, or early Europe. Alongside grinding grain and baking bread, women were carefully fermenting batches of beer. Brewing was seen as an extension of daily food preparation, a skill passed from mother to daughter like a family heirloom. These women weren't just making drinks. They were stewards of fermentation, guardians of taste, and essential to the health and happiness of their households and communities. In Sumer, the goddess Ninkasi wasn't just mythological, she reflected reality. Her presence symbolized the fact that women were the original brewmasters. Even in medieval Europe, before brewing became commercialized, the majority of beer was still produced by women, often known as alewives. These women brewed small batches and sold the surplus from their doorsteps, sometimes adorning their homes with a broomstick above the door to signal fresh ale for sale. Sound familiar? That imagery is believed by some historians to be one of the earliest origins of the witch stereotype: independent women, cauldrons bubbling, herbs and mystery. But as beer's popularity exploded and economies grew, this humble homebrew took on political and commercial weight. Enter state control, taxation, and the birth of the tavern. Rulers and empires quickly realized something important: where there's beer, there's profit. Governments began to regulate beer production, standardize ingredients, and impose taxes. It was no longer just a drink, it was revenue. Taverns and public houses began to pop up, becoming not only centers for socializing, but also hubs of political discussion, trade, and even rebellion. Beer fueled more than just bodies, it lubricated ideas, dissent, and change. These gathering spots created new social orders, new hierarchies, and new rules. Sometimes literally, as kings and clergy alike issued laws to control brewing practices and beer prices. And as men began to dominate the public tavern scene, brewing gradually shifted from a female-led domestic craft to a male-dominated commercial enterprise. Alewives were often pushed out, their skills dismissed or even demonized, as guilds and state-sanctioned breweries took over. So, beer didn't just reflect social order, it shaped it. From matriarchs to monarchs, from kitchen hearths to royal courts, brewing evolved alongside our structures of power, gender, and governance. As we move from the ancient world into the medieval period, beer takes on yet another transformation. A sacred brew that had once been passed from household to household was now entering the realm of organized religion and eventually, global commerce. Let's begin in the monasteries of medieval Europe, where brewing became both a spiritual duty and a scientific art. Monks, seeking cleanliness, nourishment, and a touch of comfort, perfected the brewing process within the stone walls of their abbeys. Remember, at a time when water could be dangerously contaminated, beer was not only safer to drink, but also packed with calories and nutrients. It was called liquid bread for a reason. Monks weren't just brewing for themselves. They were refining techniques, recording recipes, and laying the groundwork for the modern beer we know today. It was in these monasteries that hops entered the picture, those fragrant little flowers that would forever change the flavor and shelf life of beer. Before hops, brewers used a mix of herbs and spices called grut. But hops, they added bitterness, balance, and preservative power. By the 12th century, hopped beer was sweeping across Europe, and monastic breweries were becoming known not just for piety, but for product. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and with it, a seismic shift. No longer confined to cloisters or kitchens, beer became a mechanized, mass-produced beverage. Steam engines powered brewhouses, and refrigeration, thanks to pioneers like Carl von Linde, made year-round brewing possible. Glass bottles and pasteurization extended shelf life, allowing beer to travel. And travel it did, across oceans, across continents. Beer was no longer just cultural, it was global. Breweries like Guinness in Ireland, Carlsberg in Denmark, and Anheuser-Busch in the United States weren't just making beer, they were building empires. Their labels became international icons, and their brews poured in pubs, bars, and kitchens across the world. Beer had finally become what few ancient Sumerians could have imagined: a full-blown global industry, regulated, advertised, and celebrated on an unprecedented scale. From sacred altars to factory floors, beer's journey mirrors the arc of civilization itself, rising from ritual and necessity, flowing through social and spiritual life, and surging forward into the machinery of modern capitalism. It's no longer just a drink. It's a commodity, a culture, and in many ways, a symbol of how far we've come. As we wrap up our journey through the frothy history of beer, it's easy to overlook the true weight this humble drink carries. Today, we pop open a can or pour a pint without thinking much about its past. But when we take a step back and peer into the annals of history, beer reveals a story much deeper than we could ever have imagined. Beer wasn't just a happy accident, it was an evolution. It was a survival tool, a catalyst for creativity, and an essential thread in the tapestry of human connection. Think about it. Beer brought people together, from early Mesopotamians gathering to share a drink after long hours of labor, to medieval taverns where laughter echoed and stories were spun over a pint. It was at the heart of religious rituals, of festive celebrations, of trade and commerce. It wasn't just the drink that brought people together. It was the act of sharing it that fostered bonds and built communities. Even more incredibly, beer became a driving force for agriculture. It may seem hard to believe now, but the push to brew beer likely helped humanity transition from hunter-gatherers to settled farmers. It was the pursuit of that bubbly, fermented liquid that encouraged people to domesticate grains, to cultivate fields, to perfect brewing techniques that would last millennia. Beer helped us settle down, it helped us build cities, and it helped us fuel the very growth of civilization itself. And maybe, just maybe, this long history of beer is a reminder that sometimes, the greatest breakthroughs, the ones that shape the future, come from the most unexpected moments. An abandoned pot of grain, a forgotten recipe, a bit of wild fermentation. Who would have thought that the simplest of accidents could change the course of human history? Yet, here we are, thousands of years later, still raising our glasses to a drink that began as a humble, unintentional discovery. So, the next time you take a sip, remember, you're not just drinking a beer. You're sipping the story of civilization, a history of human resilience, innovation, and the power of connection. From the ancient brewing pots of Mesopotamia to the taps in your local pub, beer has been there every step of the way. Now, let's raise our glasses to history, to creativity, and to the accidental drink that built empires. Cheers! If you loved this journey through time and taste, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, so you never miss a moment of food history magic. We've only just scratched the surface of these incredible stories, and there's so much more to uncover together. And hey, we want to hear from you. What ancient food or drink do you think we should explore next? Maybe an ancient brew from the Far East, or a forgotten recipe from the Mediterranean. Drop your ideas in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going and continue this exploration of history, one bite at a time. As always, thank you for being part of this community, and for taking the time to dive into these fascinating stories with us. Until next time, keep your curiosity bubbling, and your taste buds thirsty for